Welcome back to Data Driven Leadership. I'm your host, Jess Carter. And on today's episode, we are going to be talking to Nick Elam, who is the one who helped originate the Elam ending. Hi, Nick.
Hi, great to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So, for those who haven't heard, which must be a very small population at this point, would you mind unpacking the Elam ending? Just like in general, what is it? Because if you made me do it, it would be funny, but also probably not accurate.
Sure. So the Elam ending concept, it's a different format for basketball, and it's not meant to change basketball. Really, it's meant to do the opposite because so often during the late stages of basketball games, we see the style and the quality of play deteriorate so much. And so the Elam ending is a way to preserve a more natural and exciting and fluid style of play all the way through the end of the game. The way it works is that you play most of the game with a clock, but you play the last part of the game without a clock, and you're playing to a target score instead. And it's one of those things that just a simple change like that really has been effective in uh, all the action that plays out on the court. Really looks like more like real basketball than what you would see under a time format. The concept itself originated back in 2007. That's when I first thought of the idea, and I really scrutinized the idea and tried to make sure that the idea was sound and necessary and had the potential to be cool, all those things. And once I convinced myself that the idea had merit, then the really tough part started of trying to convince others in the basketball world that the idea had merit. What I didn't know at the time was that it would take 10 years before the Elam ending was finally implemented for the first time and came to life at TBT, the basketball tournament in 2017. And then from there, people in the basketball world finally got a chance to see what this idea was all about, and that it worked. And so it's gradually grown from there. So it's been really exciting to see this concept take flight.
Okay, I already have so many questions for you. Like one of them is, it's interesting that you made this comment that almost sounded, if I may, impatient. If you're like, I can't. It took 10 years to change a sport. Like I remember moments when I was in elementary school, standing in the gym with like the weird long socks and the shorts, and they were teaching us how to play a sport. That hasn't largely changed since then, Nick. Like it's amazing to me that you like that's a change that's been implemented. And so, like, one of my questions is, would you describe yourself as a patient person?
Actually, I would,
Okay.
and I think the fact that I stuck with this for 10
Yeah.
years is evidence of that. Because again, when this first started of reaching out to people, um, I didn't know what the game plan was. I didn't have any blueprint really to follow. I was kind of developing this on my own of who to reach out to, how to reach out, when to reach out, all those sorts of things. And for a lot of this, I thought that I really was just one day away from a big breakthrough. I never ran into that ultimate dead end, which I would have just moved on to something else. And when I did reach out to people, I got very used to not getting a response of any kind. And a lot of the ones that I did get were just kind of politely saying, that it you know, wasn't their cup of tea kind of thing. But even the ones who didn't like it, no one could tell me a reason why it wouldn't work other than just as a matter of taste that they didn't like it. Um, because if they had told me that there was some fundamental flaw for why it wouldn't work, then again, I would have just moved on to something else. But that was so even these negative responses I was getting were still kind of fueling my interest in this project, my motivation, because it's like, well, even the detractors can't give me a reason why this won't work. And so, again, I felt like I was always just that one day away from a big breakthrough. It ended up being 10 years worth of one days, but that day finally came. Yeah, it was exciting.
That that's really interesting because one of the things we've talked about on other sort of episodes of the podcast is when you do have resistance to something, it's really easy to get distracted by the people part of the problem, not the actual facts of the problem. And just the way you even phrase that to be like, does it not work? Is there a better solution? No, no one's saying that. They just there may be traditionalists or people who like the tradition or like the way it's played today or have other benefits where it's not saying it's fundamentally wrong or a bad way. And it's interesting that just it sounds like it's a natural drive for you. I have to work to be almost like deliberately not reading the room of people and actually stay on the facts. That sounds like maybe it comes very naturally to you to say, like, I'm going to start with, is this a problem that's worth solving? And I'm going to keep asking that question.
Well, and again, yeah, that was a big part of the early stages of this idea and exploring this idea was to figure out if it was necessary. And so that really required a deep dive into collecting data on what was actually happening in basketball under the timed format, and the extent and the effectiveness of different phenomena that we see there. And also, you talked about taking criticism and not taking it personally. There are a few things that helped me with that. One was that, again, I got so used to not receiving a response of any kind that I truly welcomed any kind of response, even if it was critical. And again, it was like, well, again, if somebody can tell me why this won't work, then maybe I can move on to a different hobby. This might save me a lot of time. Truly, if somebody had that. And I look at any criticism as a way to fine tune the idea and possibly improve the idea too. So I was truly welcoming any kind of criticism I could find. And also the other thing is that for much of this journey, I was in a leadership position myself as a school principal. And in that position, you learn very quickly not to take criticism personally. So that was second nature for me. You don't worry about people being critical. You just hope people are being authentic with you. There's a lot of times you learn in the different discussions that, whatever you hear, there's the part that's true, there's the part that's not true, and there's the part that's being left out. And you have to kind of filter and figure out what's what. So it's like, well, if somebody's critical, then you can be pretty sure that they're being honest with you. So sometimes that's refreshing.
That's a great point. Well, so I have this image in my head, and I'm going to need you to expound on it because I'm genuinely so intrigued. In my head, you were sitting on a couch, working on whatever you were as maybe a principal at the time. I'm not even sure if that's what you were doing at the time. And you were watching this game end, and you were annoyed by the poor play, and you started creating some Excel spreadsheet, and like it began. Is that any directionally correct?
That's not too far off. So I absolutely do remember the day that the light bulb went on. It was March 10th, 2007. I was a third-year high school math teacher at the time. Okay. I hadn't reached the principal chapter of my career yet, but yes, I was on a couch. It was kind of like a tan. It was a pretty ugly couch. It was tan, almost like orange tan. I was watching a game on a Saturday afternoon, and I remember it was North Carolina State and Virginia Tech. And it was a game like so many others I had seen before. I mean, it wasn't like there was anything really distinct about this game. In fact, it was kind of the opposite. It was so familiar how such, an really exciting and fluid, fun game got to the last few minutes, and a pretty close game too. And just all the air goes out of the arena. And I don't know what it was about that game, because I was actually pretty close to the idea that's now known as the Elam ending. I was pretty close to that idea actually a few years before that. But there truly was a fundamental flaw in this previous idea that I had. And then just a light bulb went on about a simple fix to it that would make it more elegant and much more effective, all that. And I can remember being truly energized by this idea, which you know me, I'm a pretty low key guy. So it's rare for something to get me to the point where it's like uncontrollable energy. Like I remember this part too. I literally had to go to the fitness club that I belonged to, which was like not even a mile away. It was very close, but I went there and I ran. I literally had to run because I had so much energy. I was so excited by this idea. I also knew that here it was in March. I knew that there was a limited number of college basketball games that I could look into and try to kind of
Right.
study. So I had to kind of whip up a research study. Before I was really a researcher myself, I had to whip up a research study pretty quick that began the following week when the NCAA tournament started. So, and I was dumb then because I because the idea kept growing and eventually would go into spreadsheets. But at first it was just like Word docs that I was like slapping stuff onto. But yeah, eventually it did advance to the spreadsheet phase. So you weren't far off with that.
Okay. That is fascinating to me because it is neat and it's exciting to hear you describe what inspiration looks like often, where it's like suddenly there's this burst of energy and I can't stop. And it's adrenaline. Like your body feels like you have to move, you have to do something because you're so excited. And a little birdie might have told me that maybe basketball wasn't even your first love in sports. Is that right?
Baseball was absolutely my first love
Okay.
in sports when I was 5 years old, for sure. Baseball, and then as a fan, football would be next. As far as what came along, and then basketball just kind of got wrapped up into it. My mom is an
Yeah.
IU grad. We were living in Ohio, but my mom is an IU grad, so I grew up on Bob Knight and the Hoosiers. But the love for basketball came along
Yeah.
pretty good, pretty soon
It's just
too. And I,
interesting to me.
um,
I thought maybe you were going to say, well, those sports didn't have a flaw. There was nothing to fix, maybe. Or maybe you're like, no, that's next on my list. I don't know.
so that's the thing. Yeah, I can, uh, say what I would think, what I would call flaws in a lot of sports. Is just the problem is that I don't, I don't have a solution for them necessarily.
Mm.
And so that's another thing that brings me, makes me think back to my principal days. Is that you also realize quickly in a leadership position that identifying a problem, that's not it's important, but it's not the finish line either.
Right.
Identifying the solution is much more important than just being able to identify the problem. So, yeah, I mean, as someone who loves sports and consumes sports in lots of different ways, there are what I would consider flaws, but in a lot of the cases, I don't have an idea that would be any better than what's going on right now.
Man, this is so interesting. So, I have waited 25 years in my life to find the right audience to talk about when I won my middle school second league basketball game through my left-handed layup and then my free throw shot after I got fouled, and I did it. I'm here.
I'm your
So
audience.
thank you. This is
Clapping.
a gift for me. Thank you. I have never. I'm pretty sure that was my father's pride peaked at that point for me in life. But for real, you mentioned. So I'm not like a huge. I don't watch every basketball game, but I am in Indiana, and so it's on often. You talk about how the Elam ending changed the dynamics of the game. You talked about how you get to the end and the air is let out of the room. Can you share just a little bit more detail, like an example, like what something specific that you noticed or that your research called to, where you're like, if we change it in this way, here's the better quality play?
Sure. So, yeah, you get to the late stages of a basketball game, and both sides become so preoccupied with manipulating the clock that the clock becomes more of the focus than what's actually happening on the court. And the ways
Right.
that manifests are, for the first thing that usually happens is the team with the lead, who got that lead probably through some very assertive, fluid, aggressive play. They start to play in a very passive way, which is already less appealing, as a fan to watch.
I
But
see.
the one word description is that they start to stall. They start to stall the game away because whereas up to that point, scoring points was the main priority. Now it's just exhausting time. So they've settled into a passive phase. The defensive team then realizes, well, if they're just going to let time run out, then we're going to lose this game. So we have to stop the clock by any means necessary, even if we have to overtly violate the rules of the sport, which in basketball means committing a foul on purpose.
Right.
And they're so desperate to stop the clock that they're willing to allow their opponent to shoot one or two free throws and extend their lead. Um, well, what that does then is now it makes the outcome of the game much more predictable. It takes the suspense out of the game because you have a team that's already in front now being handed 3 points just on a platter. And so, that whole combination of things just, again, makes the end of the game less
Yeah.
suspenseful, less fluid, less athletic, all those things. Well, okay, so now we're going to take the clock, this clock that's causing all these phenomena. We're gonna let it do its job for most of the game, but we're gonna say sorry, see you later when it comes to the end of the game, and use a target score instead. And so when teams play to a score, now there's no incentive to stall. You have to keep playing assertively when you're in the lead. When you're behind, you don't have this desperate feeling where you have to foul and hand away free points. You can continue to rely on legitimate stops. When you're on offense and you're trailing, you don't have to rush and force up these ugly shots. You can get your best look. That makes the outcome of the game less predictable. It makes late comebacks more likely. And every game ends with the swish of a net, so you get all these great, amazing game-ending moments and celebrations. And so it's really cool how it works in so many different ways. And it's cool why the reason people like it also varies too. I know for me, I like it from a very practical standpoint that teams are just now adhering to the spirit of the rule, of the spirit of the sport, I should say, the
Right.
fundamental objectives of the sport. The offense is trying to score, the defense is trying to prevent them from scoring. And that's not true under a time format. I like it from that very practical stance. Others like it because it does have that winning shot at the end of the game. They like it for more of a kind of a sensational reason, which is cool too. So, but yeah, so there's the practical side and the cool side, and I think that's what makes for a really great
Wow.
innovation is that it's both practical and cool. And that's why I think that's the way I would describe the Elam ending is that it's practical
That
and cool.
is, I think that is awesome. And I, for sake of, at risk of sounding as naive as I am, I don't think until you just explained that I understood that the problem you were solving wasn't a I apologize for this because it does sound naive, wasn't a like tied game, how do you win at the end? It's a how do we solve for better play of the end of the game to get to the end. And so to me, there's this I mean, I knew about, of course people are fouling each other at the end of a game. I didn't think about how repetitive that does get because I probably just don't watch enough basketball. But it does get to a point where you're like, okay, this is now the move. Everyone does this now, and I'm sure it is much much more interesting to watch.
Well, and it's it's something that whether you're a casual fan or a diehard fan, we've all come to accept in basketball is the fouling at the end of the game. But truly, that in itself is really a fundamental flaw that you really don't find in other sports where a team's only recourse, and I don't mean best option. I mean their only option is to literally just blatantly break the rule of the sport. Um, that's enough of a fundamental flaw that if that happened in a board game, a card game, a video game, or certainly in a major sport, that would be worth addressing. And yet somehow we've just accepted this in basketball for over a century now. And yeah, it's just and it's again it's definitely a flaw, but it's not even a cool flaw like that. Like nobody likes watching that. And I know, and sometimes when I get pushback, people will say, well, they like the strategy of the fouling approach. And I say strategy is a grown-up word, and you got to meet two conditions in order to call something a strategy. One is that it's got to work some of the time, and the fouling strategy hardly ever works. And you've got to have other options to choose from.
Mhm.
If you've only got one option, then that's not really a strategy either. So that's always my
Right.
pushback on that by people who say that they enjoy the fouling strategy.
Okay. You're going directly into one of my next questions I was going to ask you, which is did you, I mean, other than non response, which you've already talked about a little bit, I'm still curious how you overcame some of that, other than, and maybe you're just going to say it's just consistency, but, did you have resistance and adoption to leagues? What did because part of me is like, Word documents turned into spreadsheets is one thing. Like Nick proved a concept could work. But then the leadership part of your leadership, your education, the way you're raised kicked in, and it's like, well, how do I implement change? And that's a very different tool set. And so I'm intrigued by, did you have resistance? How did you handle the non-response? How did you go from, I got an idea in my head, I've proved it out, I've done the research, to people want it, they're using it?
Yeah, well, whatever I tried, might have not been the best approach. That's probably why it took 10 years for somebody to finally buy into it. But yeah, I mean, here I was, a total basketball outsider, trying to affect change, and I had to get people on board who had influence in the basketball world. So, that's being, trying to come across as being knowledgeable without being a know-it-all, I think is a big part of it. Because here you're reaching out to people who have dedicated their lives and make their living in a sport, and here you're going to come along and say that something really fundamental about the sport needs to change. It's hard to do that without just turning people off right off the bat, no matter how good the idea is. So that's kind of a delicate balance. But again, also somewhere in there in the delivery, I had to be able to say that I'm not some knucklehead here. I've got some experience in math. Very avid follower of sports for whatever that's worth. Really vetted this idea, and I've served in leadership positions, so I know how hard it can be sometimes, and how many stakeholders have to get on board to get a change to come to be, and all those things have to be part of this delivery that I make. But then, yeah, it's a matter of, well, do I just have this avalanche of a 40-page white paper? Do I make it more short and to the point and visually appealing? Do I start by talking about the problem, then get to the solution? Do I come right out with the solution and then explain, well, what this is? So I try, and also the people that I was reaching out to, who and how do I reach out? So I tried basically everything, and I was I heard someone else describe it this way. I'd never heard it this way or thought of it, but it was actually kind of good. Somebody described it as just like shooting arrows into the sky and hoping that it something finally connected. And in a lot of ways, it kind of was. I mean, all the ingredients were there. It was just a matter of how to put it together into something that was actually going to connect with somebody. That was the bigger challenge than actually coming up with the idea itself.
That makes sense. And I mean, even just hearing you play through, this is sort of watching you build a strategy. Here are all of the different things I could do. Am I in a position where I can choose one? Or am I in a position where the strategy is we try them all and we figure out what'll work, right? That's awesome. I think there are a lot of data-driven leaders who are trying to figure out how to implement change, and hearing another leader say sometimes the right answer is to do all the things, just to put some effort in there and get your elbows a little messy and roll up your sleeves and like try and figure it out with some elbow grease, and you'll get somewhere. And maybe you'll get to the wrong spot, but you'll figure out where to turn and go from there. And it sounds like that's sort of part of the story, is you sent out a lot of stuff and you waited to see who would respond.
Yeah, and I've also heard that to connect with people who are in a business setting, to get their attention, you've got to show them up front how something is either going to make them money or save them time. And so that was also, again, it's something I have to communicate, but where does that go in this delivery here? And so again, it's just one more ingredient that has to go in there somewhere, but when, how, all those sorts of things. So,
well, okay.
When I say that I was trying everything, it wasn't that I was trying everything at once. I would try something for a while, and then when it just seemed like I was kind of running out of steam there, then I would move on to a different strategy. And then, again, it took 10 years worth of refining the argument, but finally got there. The best feeling was that the idea could speak for itself rather than me speaking on its behalf. That is such a good feeling when it plays out on the court. certainly when it plays out with a great flourish and looks great. But even times when it's kind of you know a ho hum finish, but a sound finish under the Elam ending. Still, even then, it's just nice that here the idea can speak for itself rather than me speaking on its behalf is very nice.
That's another way to test that it's a sound idea, right? I mean, from your first, is there something wrong with it? I don't think so. Down to, yeah, people are seeing it, they get it. So here's one of my questions: those KPIs, because you're right. Does it save them time or make them money? I mean, does viewership is there data around, hey, people are staying and watching the end of the game longer, either in the stands or on TV? Like, what are some of those metrics?
Yeah. So one event that does a nice job of tracking this and even sharing this is TBT the basketball tournament. This is a summer tournament that's on ESPN. They were the first to adopt the Elam ending in 2017, and they'll post some data about viewership and how it changes it. And it wasn't their event finishes up in August, but then they also will post throughout the year to stay in the public eye a little bit. And I know within the last few months they posted some data specific to the Elam ending and how the viewership changed and went up. I forget what the percentage was. I'd have to dig back and find this graphic that they had, but a significant percentage that the viewership bumped up when the game got to the Elam ending phase compared to earlier stages of the
Wow.
game. And so that was really cool to see. And so that would be one metric. And then for other leagues and events that have adopted this, sometimes I don't always get to see behind the curtain of what's going on, but yeah, I would love to be a fly on the wall sometimes on some of these discussions that go on.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Well, because my other thought was, I don't know, you did all this research that was contextualized to basketball, but like you've said, there are maybe some fundamental flaws in other sports, but there's not a solution in your head yet. I mean, part of me is wondering, are there other sports that are interested in like, have you had pressure or intrigue from other sports outside of basketball? And how does that greet you? Are you like, hold on, I need 3 more years to research it and see if it's like, what does that look like if it exists?
Basketball is certainly not the only timed sport that there is, and it's not the only time sport where teams manipulate the clock at the end of the game and become preoccupied with the clock. Um, it's probably a little bit different in that how blatantly teams violate the rules to manipulate the clock. But anyway, the thing about all these other time sports where the clock kind of overshadows the play at the end of the game, and you can go with uh, football, soccer, ice hockey, field hockey, water polo, way on down the line, lacrosse, handball, all these other time sports. The thing that makes them different from basketball is that the scoring rate in all these other sports is much lower than it is in basketball. Scoring is much more sporadic and rare in other sports. Well, what that means is that you can't really rely on scoring to take the place of the clock. Imagine playing a soccer match where you have to score one more goal. You could be there for 2 more hours. You could have players, collapsing out on the field. That would be no good. Whereas in basketball, scoring happens much more reliably and frequently that, yeah, you can realistically get rid of the clock at the end of the game and just use points instead. And it's really the only one of those time sports where
Okay.
you could do that. And now this is also where I say the inventor of basketball, James Naismith, I think he was actually right to govern basketball by a clock when he invented this back in 1891. But that is because basketball had a much lower scoring rate then. The first basketball game ever played was a 1-0 game, and for a while in basketball's infancy, it was a very low scoring sport. It was much like these other sports that are truly dependent on a clock. But for many, many years, the scoring rate has risen drastically in basketball, and it separated itself from the other sports in that way. It has the option, like these other sports don't have, it has the option to kind of distance itself from its clock, but it, it continues to rely on it more than it needs to.
Um, did you ever think about ways to change, like, did when you were creating the concept, Were there other ideas about things like, so if the scoring is getting so high that that makes the clock more of a play, were you like, do we make the court bigger? Like, are there other things? Do we add obstacle? Like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I mentioned earlier that I was kind of close to the what is now known as the Elam Ending. I was kind of close to that idea for a couple years leading up to 2007, um, but there was a fundamental flaw in that scoring early in the game could actually come back and backfire late in the game. And to me, that's like, okay, that's
Yeah.
silly. Like we could never. It's just silly. Like that's too much of a flaw. This will never work. But then I finally tightened it up. But I mean, I think it's interesting to explore all sorts of different um, ideas. On no ideas too crazy, at least at first. I mean, it might be too crazy to finally
Mm.
implement, but it's not too crazy to at least explore and discuss. So yeah, it's I love hearing or even thinking all sorts of different ideas to promote a more exciting or more fair or safer style of play, whatever the goal is.
That's awesome. I am excited to hear, and I just anticipate the other thing I like about, to your point about safer, there's less fouling. There's gonna be less. Hopefully, there'd be less injuries, less pain. I mean, I think about the other, like I think about football and how much it's been in the limelight for the last 10 years about the understanding we have on like brain injuries and things. Where it's like if we can apply better solutions to the games that also help keep players safe, that seems smart and it's
Ab-
entertaining and
ab-
fun.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, yeah, you've got the potential for injury anytime somebody is trying to foul someone else, and then also the wear and tear of just extra play. I mean, one thing that's kind of built in, I don't call this a flaw, but because sometimes it could be pretty exciting, is in a time format, is that it might lead to overtime. And I know we kind of romanticize about overtime, and I get excited when an overtime period starts, but through research, I've found that way more often than not, overtime fails to live up to the excitement that happened at the end of regulation. So it looked like you were set up for this really exciting finish, and then you go to overtime, and the game ends in a pretty routine way. Um, but I guess what I'm getting at is that in that overtime, there's also just additional wear and tear on players. Wear and tear on players, and in most sports, it's not making them any extra money because the concession stands have already closed their
Right.
doors and locked up. The broadcast has already gone through all their commercial inventory. They're not making any more commercial revenue on overtime.
Mm.
So it's just kind of like, it's honestly kind of like dead time. Um, but bringing it back to safety, yeah, it causes more wear and tear on players. So that's one thing I think for players is really appealing, is that under the Elam ending, it's a race to a certain point total. Somebody's going to get there first, and there is no overtime. There is no
Yeah.
chance that you're going to see an exciting finish, fade away and turn into a routine finish. When you're headed to that exciting finish, you're going to get it, and you're going to get it without having to extend the game in an undue way.
Yeah. Well, so similarly to your March 10th date, do you remember the first game that was played with the Elam ending? And have you had to iterate since then? Have you had to make any adjustments to it, or hey, it's been fine and it'll live on and forever? I mean, what's that look like?
Yeah, great question. I'll answer the second part first.
Okay.
I always knew that the original version of the Elam ending was not going to be the final version. I knew that it was going to evolve, and I think that's kind of real. It's really been fun to keep an eye on it and scrutinize it and think about how to fine tune it and make it better. And there have been um, some adjustments to it. I probably have to get more into the weeds than you want me to on that. But yeah, there's been some minor changes here and there
Okay.
to it. But then, as far as the first game ever played, I absolutely remember that. It was a Saturday in June in Philadelphia. Um, there is a Philadelphia University. I didn't realize this. They're like I think in athletics, they're Division II maybe, but they were the host site for TBT for these preliminary rounds that they were going to try out the Elam ending. And so they had games scheduled. They had 7 games scheduled back to back to back on a Saturday, starting at like 9 in the morning, 8 or 9 in the morning. Yeah. And then they were going to have 4 more games on that Sunday. And I was there. I was sitting at the scorer's table, and I was seeing 10 years worth of work coming to life for the first time. I was beyond nervous, um, because I didn't know if this was going to be the happiest day or the saddest day of my life, or at least in the top 5 of those, because there was a chance that this was going to just blow away in the wind and be gone. That it was going to happen and be a blur. But it wasn't going to be good enough to
Yeah.
catch on, and that was going to be it. So I knew that was a possibility going in. But that first game of the morning, it wasn't like the flashiest, most exciting finish, but it was a game that ended with I think the margin of victory that first game was like 7 or 8 points, kind of like what I would call a medium-sized margin of victory. But the game ended it was smooth. It was like there was no, because a game has a margin of about 7 or 8 points. That's where you would see the worst, really halting, choppy play. And here was a game that was able to proceed in a smooth way and a not a clunky way. And so I thought, okay, that's good. Then there were a couple of games that still everything's looking sound, nothing spectacular, but that's okay. It was like the 4th or 5th game of the day that we had a game that came down to what I would call a sudden death finish, where the next bucket wins. And one of the things that I'd always wondered going up to this was, okay, in a really exciting close game, when that shot goes through the net and there's no clock, is it going to be able to capture the same excitement, the feel of a buzzer beater? That's something that we love about the time format, and rightfully so. We don't want to get rid of the things that we already enjoy. Can we still capture that feeling? Well, here in the 4th or 5th game of the day, in the history of the Elam Ending, with a game that came down to sudden death, we had a player, his name's Josh Selby, who had played previously in the NBA, made a tough contested kind of step back mid-range jumper, and the team ran out from the bench. He had this great celebration where he untucked his jersey. The team ran out on the court, embraced. Like, it had the look, the sound, the feel of a buzzer beater, even though there was no buzzer. And
Wow.
that was really cool to me. That was really important too, because I had said all along that I really felt like Elam Ending was something that we could keep and enhance the things that we already do enjoy about the time format, but get rid of the things that we don't enjoy. And so that was evidence right there in my corner. And then the next game also proved a point or addressed something that I thought was really important too. I'd always thought, and I mentioned even earlier in our interview, that I feel like the Elam Ending makes the game more suspenseful. It gives the trailing team more of a chance to come back, but to do so in an authentic way. And in the next game, there was a 13-point deficit going into the Elam Ending. That's a deficit that at that stage of a time format, you would normally, truly, the game would be over.
Right.
Well, here the trailing team went on a 14-0 run to take the lead, and then it was back and forth for the rest of the game. And again, finally, this is actually at a more reasonable time of the day too. So the gym was starting to fill up. There are actual fans in the stands now, and people were going crazy. I was going crazy, but I couldn't show it. I had to stay cool and calm there at the court side. But that was really important to see that. And then, the rest of the weekend finished out in pretty, sound fashion. But I knew by the time I left Philadelphia that weekend and went home, I was like, I knew that this idea is going to live on somehow, some way. And I was hoping that it would be with TBT. I would hope they would continue to use it. But I was like, you know what? I'm not giving up on this idea after seeing it. I'm going to keep pushing until somebody else adopts it. And it was actually I was kept in limbo for a while, and it wasn't until the following spring in 2018 that I kept in touch with TBT, but it wasn't until the spring of 2018 that TBT said that they were going all in with the Elam, and they were not just going to. It wasn't just going to be an experimental basis anymore. It wasn't just going to be their preliminary rounds. It was across the board.
Wow.
And every game since then they've used it, and that was a very affirming and exciting day, but um, I had to wait a long time to get to get that
Uh,
uh, vote of confidence, But I knew in my mind that somehow, some way, based on that first weekend there, that the idea was going to be it was going to live on somewhere.
that is so cool. And I love hearing you walk through this because I think so I don't know if you'll be surprised by this, but there aren't tons of like basketball episodes on our podcast. And so what's interesting is you're kind of doing this great job weaving sort of leadership principles throughout this story, and to hear that you waited and worked and reached out for 10 years to try something. Like most leaders have they're in leadership for a reason, and they're trying to, you know, sort of engender buy-in to something they're trying to do. And there's this inspiration in your story, Nick. It's helpful for people who are somewhere on that journey, not quite at that point, or even who implemented something meaningful, but maybe didn't get those kinds of meaningful words exchanged. But it's like, you actually took something that you've admitted that other people might love more than you, and you actually helped bring it back to like a more pure form, maybe, if I can sort of, romanticize this a bit. And I think that's really cool. I think it's special.
Yeah, and the word pure is also a word I've heard. People who are complimentary of the idea is that like it purifies the game, and that's what you want to hear, especially from people who uh, where the game of basketball is really important to them, and for them to
Mm.
say something like that, for them to be first of all open to a change like this, and then embrace the change like that, um, really means a lot. So yeah, those are some of
Yeah,
the best compliments I could ever get.
I love it. And then to push you a little bit outside of some of the sports comfort zone for us, that you've been a leader, you've been a principal, you have, I don't know, the list of degrees I could mention. Do you have, I don't know, when you look at the last decade, maybe more, a little more, do you have any thoughts on I if somebody else is going through they are a leader and they are in the middle of a journey that somewhat resembles what you just went through, lessons, like if you could go back and do it again, things that you would tell yourself now, not necessarily regrets, but like, any advice you would give to someone who's maybe in the middle of their research bit, or in the middle of I'm not getting any responses, or hey, they might actually adopt it, I'm so nervous. I mean, like one of the things that stands out to me that you've already said without saying it is getting to that point of adoption, like getting it to the point where end users or stakeholders can feel, can sense, can experience the change. And you did a lot you didn't rush that to, like, you didn't go do that before you made a bunch of tweaks. You were very thoughtful about kind of as you changed it and updated it, that the right thing, they felt the right thing. That if it was going to die, you gave it your best shot. Does that seems like an important exercise? Is let's get it into their hands as fast as we can, but let's get the right thing into their hands. That's something that stands out to me.
Well, and you know, yeah, leadership lesson. I would say, one mindset I had all along with this was that, and I mentioned this before, that I knew that the original version of the Elam ending was not going to be the final version. And once it was put into practice, that I was going to see things that I wanted to improve, but then also just the fact that once this is in the hands of other people and it's affecting them in different ways and affecting their stakeholders in different ways, and people are going to want different things, um, you have to be open to evolving along with that and tailoring that. So I would say to a leader, if you've got this awesome idea that you want to introduce to your stakeholders, um, you might you have to know what you're willing to evolve and with and take feedback with, and you have to know what elements are so fundamental to your original vision that you're going to fight for it and make sure that's a lasting part of it. So um, yeah,
Hmm.
for any leaders out there, when you're trying to affect change, know what hill you're willing to die on and which ones you're
Yeah.
willing to compromise on.
Wow. I love that. You've certainly, and I hear that in your story of moments when it was like, this is your why was fundamental to everything. And so as long as the why didn't change, you were willing to play with the other components. I think that that's super important. And it's interesting too that you had this commitment to the cause before you had a single stakeholder. And I think that's really interesting too, is you were kind of working from the outside, if you will, and had to work your way in. And so those are leaders who aren't even leaders in their space yet. That's just somebody with a good idea, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, for a lot of this journey, I was a leader, but not in this project that I was doing.
Yeah.
So I was, but yeah, this totally parallel track I was on, in the education world and then this independent project. I was able to take lessons from one and translate it to the other, and in both directions too. These pursuits in my life have complemented each other so nicely, and it's yeah, it's cool. I don't know what to compare it to, honestly, but yeah, having these different dreams and ambitions, I think, is cool, and it's something that I would advise and have advised people. If there's a creative way to follow two dreams, go for it, because I don't know, I think it's been so enriching to have both of those in my life.
Well, and you've paid attention to your interests, which is really important too, right? You paid attention to when you had to go jog because you were so excited. And I think that's really neat. Is there anything else that you wanted to share that we did not cover?
Well, I do. I mean, I guess one of the last things I mentioned there was, I mean, I do enjoy sharing this story, and because again, it's not. There's a lot to unpack. It's very personal. I think there's a lot of, even for somebody who's not a basketball fan at all in the audience, I think there's a lot of lessons that translate. And so I have enjoyed the opportunity to go into schools and share this message, to go at different universities and speak about this idea, even in some businesses. So I guess if there is someone, I think I'm speaking particularly to school leaders out there,
Yeah.
someone listening to your podcast, but even somebody in the business world who you think this message would translate about this journey that I've been on and still am on. I'd love to come speak, and something I really enjoy. I'd love to connect. So
How do they do that? How do
yeah,
they find you?
yeah. My email is nick@elamending.com. nick@elamending.com would probably be the one way to connect, but also I'm on LinkedIn. People can find me there. That'd probably be the second best way to connect. But yeah, I would
Awesome.
love to come share the story.
Cool. Well, it's a great story to share. So thanks again for being on the podcast.
Yeah, I loved it. It was fun.
Thank you guys for listening. I'm your host, Jess Carter. Don't forget to follow the Data Driven Leadership wherever you get your podcasts, and rate and review, letting us know how these data topics are transforming your business. We can't wait for you to join us on the next episode.